She left her home for candles. Just candles. A simple errand on a cold November night. Hanorah Berry never made it back. What happened in the dark fields of County Limerick in 1879 wasn't just murder. It was a chilling silence that swallowed a young mother whole and left a wound in history that still bleeds. Before the darkness took her, there was life. Fragile, ordinary, and fiercely cherished. Hanorah Berry. Remember this name, not just as a victim, but as a person whose light was violently stolen. She was 22 years old, not a statistic, but a young woman standing at the threshold of motherhood and marriage. Her world revolved around a small, rain-lashed cottage clinging to the land near Rathkeil, County Limerick. Life here wasn't just hard, it was etched in struggle. Poverty wasn't just circumstance, it was the air they breathed. Every scrap of food, every moment of warmth, was hard-won. Her husband, John Berry, worked the stubborn soil, wrestling a living from it. Hanorah was the anchor. She kept the hearth, however meager, tended the home, and cradled their most precious hope, a newborn baby boy, only weeks old. His tiny breaths, his cries, his warmth against her. This was the fragile universe she protected. Now, picture that evening, November 15th, 1879. Dusk wasn't falling. It was rushing in, swallowing the gray Irish landscape whole. A chill, sharp and insistent, cut through the thin walls of their cottage. Inside, the light was failing. The candles, those small, essential defenses against the consuming winter dark, were guttering out. Without them, the night inside would be as black and cold as the night outside. And so, Hanorah made a decision born of necessity, a task repeated countless times before. She pulled her shawl tighter, perhaps casting one last glance at the sleeping form of her infant son, or sharing a word with John. Her destination was simple, the nearby village. Her mission was heartbreakingly mundane, to buy candles. Just candles. A short walk she'd taken 100 times. Essential light against the encroaching winter dark. She stepped out into the twilight. The cottage door closed behind her. It was a journey measured in minutes. A simple errand to prolong the light and warmth within her small, precious world. She had no way of knowing it was the last time she would see her home, her husband, her baby. No way of knowing that the very darkness she sought to hold at bay with those precious candles was waiting for her. Not just in the sky, but in the heart of a killer hiding in the lonely fields between her cottage and the village lights. The threads of her world, woven with such ordinary care, were about to unravel completely. Let's walk those final hours with Hanorah Berry, step by step, minute by agonizing minute. It's crucial to understand the path she took, the ordinary moments that became her last, and the terrifying void that swallowed her whole. The errand completed. Witnesses in Rathkeil confirm it. Hanorah arrived in the village as dusk thickened into proper night. She moved with purpose, likely feeling the bite of the November air even more keenly now. Her focus? Candles. That simple, vital purchase. We can imagine the small comfort of the shop's light. The brief exchange, coins for wax and wick. The transaction complete. She secured the candles, perhaps tucking them carefully into a pocket or a fold of her shawl. Essential light acquired. Mission accomplished. Her thoughts would have been turning homeward, to the warmth she hoped to reclaim, to the tiny life waiting for her in the cottage. She turned her back on the faint glow of the village and started the walk back. Alone, the quiet, lonely road stretched out before her. Darkness wasn't just falling now, it was complete. A heavy, suffocating blackness pressed in from the fields on either side. The kind of dark where shapes blur and sounds seem unnaturally loud. The kind of dark where someone could be waiting, unseen. The walk home, vanishing point, this stretch of road, familiar underfoot, became a corridor into the unknown. How far did she get? Did she walk briskly, a flicker of unease stirring as the village lights faded behind her? Or was she lost in thought, perhaps about her baby? The chores awaiting her, the meager supper? We don't know if she heard footsteps behind her. We don't know if a shadow detached itself from the hedgerow. We only know she never reached her door. The darkness along that lonely road absorbed her completely. The silence of the fields became absolute. Holding its terrible secret, John's mounting dread back at the cottage. Time began to stretch and warp. John Berry waited. Minutes ticked by, then an hour. The cold deepened inside the cottage as the last embers of their fire faded without the new candles to extend their light. The baby might have stirred, needing its mother. Where was she? This walk wasn't long. Not this long. A simple errand had spiraled into an absence that felt wrong. Deeply, chillingly wrong. Anxiety, cold and sharp as the night air, began to prickle at John. It started as a whisper of worry, then grew into a clamoring fear. Something wasn't right. He couldn't just sit and wait in the suffocating dark. He had to look. He had to find her, grabbing whatever feeble light source he had left, perhaps a lantern with a dying flame, or just a rushlight sputtering its last. John Barry stepped out into the same oppressive darkness that had swallowed his wife. He retraced the path she should have taken, calling her name into the void. Hanorah! Hanorah! His voice, swallowed by the vast night. He scanned the roadside, peered into the blackness of the fields. Nothing. No answering call. No glimpse of her shawl. No sign of her at all on that desolate road. With every step, every unanswered cry, the cold fear solidified into a hard knot of dread in his chest. She was gone. Vanished. The silence of the fields felt mocking, terrifying. He returned to the empty cottage. The darkness now complete inside and out, filled with a terrible, gnawing uncertainty. The longest night of his life had begun. Dawn's horrible revelation, November 16th, 1879, morning light, gray and cold, seeped across County Limerick. It offered no comfort, only illumination for horror. The search resumed, likely joined by neighbors now, grim-faced and fearful. The dread that had kept John company through the night turned sickeningly real. Hanorah Barry's body was discovered, but not where anyone expected. Not lying on the open road where she might have fallen ill or met with an accident. No, her body was found concealed, hidden away from prying eyes in a water-filled ditch within a field near her own home. This wasn't a simple tragedy. This was an act of deliberate violence, an attempt to hide the evidence of a terrible crime. She hadn't stumbled and fallen. She hadn't slipped and drowned accidentally in a shallow ditch. The positioning screamed intent. The concealment shouted guilt. The truth, laid bare in the harsh morning light, was brutal and undeniable. Hanorah Barry had been murdered. Violently. Someone had ended her young life and tried to hide what they'd done in that filthy, cold water. The autopsy, mapping the savagery, the doctor's report, when it came, was clinical in its language, but devastating in its implications. It mapped the final, agonizing moments of Hanorah Barry's life with chilling clarity. The cause of death was drowning, her lungs filled with the dirty ditch water. But that wasn't the whole story. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. Before the water claimed her, Hanorah Barry had suffered horrific, devastating head injuries, blunt, force trauma, repeated, savage blows to the head. The force required to inflict such injuries spoke of rage, or cold, brutal efficiency. The medical evidence painted a picture far removed from a quick, merciful end. It spoke of a fierce, desperate struggle. Hanorah had fought back. She had fought for her life with everything she had. Scratches, bruises, the torn state of her clothes. These were the silent witnesses to her terror and her courage. She clawed. She kicked. She tried to escape the horror descending upon her in that dark field. But the onslaught was too much. The blows rained down, shattering bone, tearing flesh, likely dazing her, weakening her. Then, perhaps as she lay stunned, perhaps as she was held down, her killer forced her head beneath the surface of that stagnant ditch water, and held it there, ignored the frantic thrashing that would have churned the muddy water, ignored the primal fight for air, held it there until the desperate struggle ceased, held it there until the last, trapped bubble of air escaped her lips and rose silently through the filthy water, held it there until Hanorah Barry, young mother, wife, light of a small cottage, was utterly, irrevocably extinguished. The autopsy report wasn't just a medical document. It was a testament to unimaginable cruelty and a young woman's raw, futile fight against the darkness that had stalked her on a simple errand for candles. The murder of Hanorah Barry sent shockwaves through Rathkeil. The Victorian police, likely a small local constabulary more used to petty disputes than brutal homicide, were thrust into the spotlight. Their task was immense. Find the monster who could do this. But the trail began in mud, darkness, and sheer terror. Clues weren't neatly laid out. They were hidden, trampled, or washed away in the grim reality of that waterlogged ditch and the panic that followed discovery. Piecing together what happened felt like grasping at shadows. The scene, a silent testament to horror, the field near Hanorah's home, the ditch where she was found, became a grim canvas. It wasn't just a dumping ground. It was the stage for her final, Desperate moments. Police scoured the area meticulously, and the ground, despite the damp and the disturbance, whispered fragments of the truth. Near the ditch, unmistakable signs pointed to a violent struggle. The earth wasn't just churned by discovery. It bore the marks of a fierce fight. Scuff marks, flattened grass or rushes torn up, indentations where knees or bodies might have pressed down. This wasn't a quick ambush. Hanorah Berry had fought back with everything she had. Then, there were the poignant, heartbreaking finds. Hanorah's shawl, not draped neatly, but found nearby. Torn, ripped fabric spoke louder than words. Did her attacker grab it? Did she tear it herself in the frantic struggle to break free? It was a silent witness to her terror and her resistance. And then, perhaps the most gut-wrenching symbols of all, her precious candles, found scattered on the ground near the scene. Unused, unlit, they hadn't even had the chance to fulfill their simple purpose. These weren't just dropped. They were flung or knocked away during the attack. Wax and wick, meant to push back the winter dark, became stark, cold emblems of the light that had been violently, permanently extinguished. The very reason she was out there, lying discarded in the mud. The weapon, a ghost in the evidence. One glaring absence haunted the investigation. The weapon. What instrument of brute force had delivered the horrific, crushing blows to Hanorah's head? The autopsy was clear, blunt force trauma. Something heavy, something wielded with terrible intent. The police searched. Did they scour the ditch, the surrounding fields, the nearby hedgerows? Likely yes, but they found nothing. No bloodied rock discarded nearby. No heavy stick or club lying suspiciously in the grass. No farm implement left out of place. It vanished. Had the killer taken it with them? Thrown it far into a bog or river? Hidden it somewhere only they knew? The lack of the weapon was a massive hole in the case. Was it a rock picked up in the heat of the moment? A piece of wood? Something deliberately brought? We can only imagine its weight, its cruel shape, the force required. It remained a ghost, a silent partner to the crime, its identity lost to time and the killer's cunning or luck. Suspicion crystallizes, Michael Larkin, in a small, tight-knit, terrified community like Rathkeel. Suspicion moves fast. Whispers became accusations. And the finger, like a compass needle drawn to magnetic north, pointed squarely at one man, Michael Larkin. Not a stranger, not a shadowy figure from afar. A neighbor, someone who lived close enough to know the rhythms of the Berry household, to know John, to know Hanorah, someone who walked the same lanes, worked the same land. Why him? The answer wasn't found in some complex conspiracy or hidden secret. The reason seemed chillingly, absurdly petty to the core. Motive, the poison of an insult. The motive police and the community latched onto was rooted in a deep, festering resentment. Michael Larkin was known to harbor a bitter grudge against John Berry. The source? Words. Specifically, John Berry had reportedly, at some point before that fateful night, called Michael Larkin a bog-trotter. To modern ears, it might sound almost quaint, but in 1879 rural Ireland, this was no mere insult. It was a vicious ethnic slur, dripping with contempt. It mocked the impoverished Irish tenant farmers struggling to survive on wet, difficult land. It reduced a man to a caricature, an object of ridicule. For Larkin, this insult wasn't just brushed off. It festered. It became a burning ember of hatred. Was the seed of this horrific violence planted by that single, cruel word? Did the simmering resentment over being called a bog-trotter boil over into murderous rage against John Berry, a rage tragically directed at John's vulnerable wife? The theory was stark, revenge for an insult, a life brutally extinguished over a slur. The sheer disproportion was staggering, adding a layer of senseless horror to the already overwhelming brutality. Could pettiness truly ignite such savagery? Larkin's alibi, built on shifting sand, naturally. Michael Larkin would have been questioned. And naturally, he would have provided an alibi, a story of where he was and what he was doing on the evening of November 15th, 1879, while Hanorah Berry was walking home to her death. He claimed he was elsewhere, but elsewhere wasn't solid ground. His alibi was shaky, wobbly. It lacked the concrete proof needed to definitively place him far from the scene of the crime. Crucially, there were witnesses, people who came forward, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps fueled by fear or outrage, who placed Michael Larkin near the scene, near that lonely road, near the fields surrounding the Berry cottage, near the vicinity of the ditch, around the critical time when Hanorah vanished. These witness statements cast long, dark shadows over Larkin's claims. They didn't necessarily put him at the exact ditch, weapon in hand, but they placed him disturbingly close to the place and time of the murder. His alibi didn't hold up under the weight of their testimony. He was in the area. He had the motive, however twisted it seemed. The cloud of suspicion hanging over Michael Larkin grew thick and dark. The inquest, justice demanded, but not yet served. The formal legal process began with a coroner's inquest. This wasn't a trial, but a crucial hearing to determine the facts surrounding a suspicious death. A jury of local men listened. They heard the stark details: the discovery of Hanorah's body concealed in the ditch, the horrific medical evidence, the brutal head injuries, the drowning, the signs of a desperate struggle. They heard about the torn shawl, the scattered candles. They learned of the bitter grudge held by Michael Larkin against John Barry, fueled by the poisonous bogtrotter insult. They heard the shaky alibi and the damning testimony placing Larkin near the scene. They absorbed the sheer, overwhelming brutality visited upon a young mother on a simple errand. The picture painted for the jury was grim and pointed. After hearing this evidence, the coroner's jury reached their solemn verdict. It was stark. It was unequivocal. They found that Hanorah Barry had been the victim of willful murder, and they named the man they believed responsible. Their verdict: willful murder against Michael Larkin. It was a powerful statement. It meant the evidence presented pointed strongly to Larkin as the killer, and that Hanorah's death was not an accident, but a deliberate, criminal act of murder. It was the community and the law demanding justice for Hanorah. It was the crucial step that should have led directly to a criminal trial. The case, it seemed, had its prime suspect, officially named by the inquest jury, but the journey towards justice was far from over. The verdict was a beginning, not an end. The cold, brutal facts of the murder are horrifying enough, but to truly grasp the depth of this tragedy, we must step away from the ditch, the evidence, and the suspect. We must step into the crushing silence left behind in that small cottage near Rathkeil. We must feel the human cost, the emotional devastation that rippled outwards, changing lives forever. This isn't just about a crime. It's about the echoing void it created. John Barry, the world shattered. Try, for a moment, to stand in John Barry's shoes on the morning of November 16th, 1879. The night before had been a slow descent into terror, the waiting, the searching in the suffocating dark, the chilling silence where his wife's voice should have been. Then dawn brought not relief, but confirmation of his worst nightmare. Hanorah was gone, not lost, not run away, but brutally, savagely murdered. His young wife, the woman who shared his hard life, his small joys, his fears, the mother of his newborn son, the center of his fragile world. Imagine the sheer, physical impact of that knowledge hitting him. It wasn't just sadness. It was a seismic shock, shattering the foundations of his existence. Grief descended like a physical weight, crushing the breath from him. It was a constant, suffocating pressure on his chest, a leaden feeling in his limbs. Every corner of the cottage they shared would scream her absence. The unmade bed where she last slept, the cold hearth she would have lit with the candles she never brought home, the quiet space where her voice, her laughter, her comforting presence should have been. The sheer violence of her death would replay in his mind, the horror of how she was taken, the knowledge of her fear, her struggle, her suffering. The thought of her alone in the dark, facing such terror, would be its own unique torture. How do you even begin to process that? How do you find air when your world has collapsed into a nightmare? John wasn't just grieving a loss. He was drowning in the aftermath of a profound violation, haunted by images no husband should ever have to bear. And yet, amidst this personal apocalypse, there was a tiny, fragile life depending on him. The cruelest blow, a life too small, in the depths of John's fresh, raw grief. Another tragedy was unfolding, quiet and inevitable, yet utterly devastating. Hanorah's newborn baby boy, just weeks old, utterly dependent. His entire world had been his mother, her warmth, her scent, her milk, the constant, comforting rhythm of her presence, the sound of her heartbeat he knew from the womb. In an instant, that world vanished. He was deprived of everything essential, deprived of his mother's milk, the vital nourishment he needed to survive. In 1879 rural Ireland, finding a wet nurse quickly, or having the means for safe alternatives, was far from guaranteed, especially for the impoverished. But it was more than just physical sustenance. He was deprived of her warmth, the fundamental comfort of her arms, deprived of the soothing sound of her voice, the feeling of safety only a mother can provide. A newborn doesn't understand murder. It understands absence. It understands profound, terrifying need unmet. The tiny infant, already thrust into a harsh world, now faced an impossible void. He couldn't thrive. He couldn't even hold on. The stress, the lack, the sheer biological shock of losing his primary source of life and comfort. It was too much. His tiny system, already vulnerable, simply couldn't withstand it. Just weeks after Hanorah was ripped away, just as John was grappling with the immensity of his own loss, another light flickered and died. The baby boy, unnamed in most records, but deeply loved, succumbed, grief upon grief, loss piled upon unbearable loss. Where there had briefly been a family, however poor, however struggling, there was now only John Barry, standing alone amidst utter ruin. A wife and a son, gone. A future, erased. The cottage wasn't just empty. It was a tomb for his entire world. The sheer cruelty of this double loss defies comprehension. It feels like fate twisting the knife with vicious, unnecessary force. Rathkeil, a community gripped by ice. The shockwaves didn't stop at the Barry cottage door. The news of Hanorah's murder, and then the death of her baby, spread through Rathkeil and the surrounding townlands like a physical chill. Imagine the atmosphere. This wasn't a distant crime reported in a newspaper. This happened here, on their road, in their fields, to one of their own, a young mother, known to them, seen just the day before. The initial reaction was sheer, stunned disbelief. How could this happen? Here, then. As the brutal details emerged, the concealment in the ditch, the horrific head injuries, the drowning, disbelief curdled into horror. A deep, primal fear began to slither through the community. It crept under doors, into cottages, settling around hearths that suddenly felt less safe. People looked at their neighbors, differently. Who among them was capable of such brutality? The knowledge that the killer was likely someone from within their midst, not a stranger passing through, was terrifying. It shattered the fragile sense of security in a close-knit, rural place. Doors were bolted more firmly. Journeys after dark were made with fearful glances over shoulders. Whispers filled the lanes. Was it Larkin? Could it really be him? And over what? The motive, when it surfaced, added another layer of chilling disbelief. A vicious insult? A slur? That provoked this level of savagery against an innocent woman? The sheer pettiness of the suspected motive made the brutality seem even more monstrous, more random, more terrifying. If a harsh word could lead to this, then no one was truly safe. The fear wasn't just about a killer being caught. It was about the darkness this act revealed could exist in the human heart, right next door. The murder of Hanorah Barry and the subsequent death of her infant son weren't just personal tragedies. They became a communal wound. The sheer brutality of the act, the devastating loss of both mother and child, the violation of their shared space, and the terrifying unknown of the killer's identity, even with Larkin suspected, cast a long, heavy pall over Rathkeil. It wasn't a shadow that lifted quickly. It lingered in the collective memory, a story passed down not just as history, but as a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the horror that could walk among them. For generations, the name Hanorah Barry would evoke not just sadness, but a deep, unsettling shiver, the echo of a scream in the dark fields, and the silence of a cradle left forever empty. The light hadn't just gone out in one cottage. A profound darkness had touched them all. The inquest verdict was clear: willful murder against Michael Larkin. For John Barry, reeling from the double loss of his wife and infant son, and for the terrified community of Rathkeil, this must have felt like a crucial step, a sign that justice, however delayed, would be pursued, that Hanorah's brutal death, and the devastating chain reaction it caused, would not be ignored. Action followed the verdict. Arrest and charge, the promise of justice. Michael Larkin was arrested, formally charged with the willful murder of Hanorah Barry. He was taken into custody. The legal machinery of Victorian Ireland, ponderous but seemingly resolute, began to turn. The evidence laid out at the inquest seemed compelling, at least enough to warrant a trial. There was the damning motive, the festering grudge over the Bogtrotta insult. There was the shaky alibi, crumbling under the weight of witness testimony, placing him near the scene at the critical time. There was the horrific nature of the crime itself, demanding accountability. The community watched, gripped by a mixture of fear, outrage, and a desperate hope for resolution. They needed to see the man they believed capable of such savagery face the ultimate consequence. They needed to feel that the darkness that had descended upon them could be dispelled by the light of justice. The case file moved forward. Preparations for a trial began. It seemed inevitable. Michael Larkin would stand before a judge and jury. The truth, they hoped, would finally be laid bare. Hanorah's voice, silenced in the ditch, might yet be heard through the evidence. The creeping silence, a historical black hole. The Victorian justice system moved. It was slow, bureaucratic, bound by its own rules and limitations. Records were created, documents shuffled. The case progressed beyond the inquest. Beyond the initial charge, it entered the formal system for trial. And then, something happened. Or perhaps, nothing happened with enough force to leave a lasting mark. The historical record, which had meticulously noted the murder, the inquest, the arrest, and the charge, falls silent. Not gradually, but abruptly, like a door slamming shut. The trail goes cold, not on a lonely road in County Limerick, but in the musty archives and courthouse vaults. The anticipated trial of Michael Larkin for the murder of Hanorah Berry vanishes. There is no transcript, no newspaper reports detailing dramatic courtroom revelations or a verdict, no official record of the trial proceedings, the arguments of prosecution and defense, the judge's instructions, or the jury's deliberation. It's a black hole in the historical narrative, a profound, echoing silence where the climax of this tragedy should have been. The chilling truth, justice evaporated, the undeniable, deeply unsettling truth uncovered by historians delving into this case is stark. No verifiable record of Michael Larkin ever standing trial for Hanorah Berry's murder has been found. He was charged, he was held, the system engaged, and then, nothing. The case effectively evaporated before reaching its logical, necessary conclusion in a courtroom. Why? The silence offers no easy answers, only chilling possibilities that haunt the story. Did the case collapse? Was the evidence gathered by the local constabulary compelling enough for the inquest jury, deemed insufficient by prosecutors or a judge for a criminal trial? Was the motive, based largely on hearsay about an insult, considered too flimsy? Were the witnesses who placed Larkin near the scene deemed unreliable under stricter courtroom scrutiny? Legal technicality? Was there a fatal flaw in the arrest procedure, the charging documents, or the handling of evidence? Victorian law was complex, and a single misstep could derail an entire prosecution. Insufficient evidence? Beyond the motive and the proximity, was there simply no physical evidence definitively linking Larkin to the murder? No murder weapon, no blood-stained clothing found in his possession, no confession, just strong suspicion, but perhaps not proof beyond reasonable doubt required for a conviction. Fear or intimidation? Was there pressure applied? Were witnesses threatened into silence or recanting their statements? Was there fear within the community or even within the legal system itself about pursuing a potentially volatile local figure? Did the specter of violence cast a shadow over the process? Sheer difficulty? Was it simply the overwhelming challenge of rural policing in 1879? Limited resources, overstretched officers, the difficulty of securing convincing forensic evidence, virtually non-existent then, and the passage of time allowing memories to fade and stories to solidify? Did the case, tragically, just slip through the cracks of an imperfect system overwhelmed by brutality? The verdict of history: a killer walks free. Regardless of the specific reason lost to time, the outcome is horrifically clear. Michael Larkin walked free. He was never tried. He was never convicted. He never faced a jury of his peers for the alleged murder of Hanorah Berry. The charge, the arrest, the inquest verdict, they led nowhere. The legal process, which had seemed poised to deliver some measure of accountability, simply stopped. The system failed Hanorah Berry utterly. It failed her grieving husband, John, who had already lost everything. It failed the terrified community desperate for safety and closure. And it failed her infant son, whose short life was a direct casualty of her murder, and who also received no justice. The cold case, frozen in time, the brutal murder of Hanorah Berry, the devastating death of her baby, and the subsequent arrest of Michael Larkin culminated in nothing. No legal resolution, no official answer. The case didn't just go unsolved in the investigative sense. It went unconcluded in the legal sense. It became a cold case, not through lack of a suspect, but through a failure of the justice system itself. It froze solid in the Irish winter of 1879 and has remained frozen ever since. A young mother beaten and drowned, a newborn child perishing from the loss, a prime suspect named, and then silence, emptiness, a void where justice should have been, the enduring shadow. So, the final, chilling update is the absence of an update. The twist ending is the lack of an ending. Michael Larkin walked back into the life of the community. Or perhaps left it. He lived his life. Hanorah Berry and her baby lie in unmarked graves or graves long forgotten. Their story a footnote of injustice. Their killer, whether it was Michael Larkin, driven by petty rage over a slur, or another shadowed figure who took advantage of the dark and the loneliness, was never officially held accountable. They escaped not just the scene of the crime, but the grasp of the law entirely. The question screamed by the scattered candles, the torn shawl, the water-filled ditch, and the tiny coffin was never answered by the courts. Who killed Hanorah Berry? The silence of the Victorian justice system speaks as loudly as the brutality of the crime itself, leaving a legacy not of resolution, but of profound, unsettling injustice that echoes across 145 years. The case remains open. The killer remains unnamed by law. The light remains extinguished. Listen closely. That sound, it's the fragile scrape of hope against the darkness. The simple act of lighting a candle, just as Hanorah Berry did one last time on November 15th, 1879, before stepping out into a night that would swallow her whole. She left for candles. She met unimaginable darkness instead. Remember that sound. Remember her. Her story cuts deeper than complex conspiracies. It cuts sharper than modern forensics. This is raw, human, a bone-deep reminder of how terrifyingly fragile a single life can be, snuffed out in an instant by senseless, unresolved hatred. No grand schemes, just a young mother, cold, needing light, walking into the waiting jaws of pure evil. Picture them, Hanorah Berry, 22 summers old, her nameless infant son, barely weeks into this world. Both gone, erased, not by time, not by accident, but by violence and neglect. And their killer? Shielded, not by cunning, but by crumbling records, a failed justice system, and the relentless march of years, a shadow that slipped into the fog of history, untouched. So we stand here, 145 years later, staring into that same ditch of unanswered questions. Was it Michael Larkin? Did the poison of a single, vile insult, bog-trot, truly fester into murderous rage? Did that resentment burn so white-hot in his chest that he ambushed a young mother in the dark? Or did another predator walk those frozen Irish fields that night? Someone forgotten by history? Someone who saw vulnerability and pounced? The lonely road, the suffocating dark, a figure stepping from behind a hedge, the first crushing blow. We don't know. The candle Hanorah bought that night? It never burned, found scattered, unlit, in the mud beside her torn shawl. The light she sought was extinguished forever. But the question her death ignited? It still burns. Who killed Hanorah Berry? What chills you most about this darkness? The scattered, unlit candles, symbols of hope destroyed? The petty insult that may have triggered a double murder? The crushing weight of John Berry's grief, losing wife and child within weeks? Or the deafening silence of the justice system that simply let it go? Tell me below. Share the piece of this tragedy that haunts you. Subscribe. Don't let their stories fade into the shadows of time. We delve into the forgotten corners, the cold cases where the light was stolen. We speak the names the world tried to erase. We remember Hanorah Berry. We remember the light that was taken.